In preparation for rendering this chair that I made in a previous video where I cast shadows, I transferred it to marker paper, put the marker paper over top, and this time I used a straight edge. I used my set square. I want something really graphic. So even though it's a soft furnishing, I went right in there and made everything as sharp as I could make it. The softening will happen when it's rendered. I used my skinny pen to start everything. I outlined everything with this, my Pilot G Tech C4. And then I went back with my middleweight pen, my Papermate Flare medium, and I emphasized the outside line in the light. But the outside line in the shadow had to be even stronger than that, so I used my Pentel Sign Pen. Think back about the geometric shape that this chair is really founded on. And we can recognize this box and even the shape of the shadow quite easily. And that's your job. Before you render, you look for the geometric shape. So as we've seen, they take on the shape of that form. So being able to recognize it and know what marker to use where and which value you're looking at, whether it's a light or a halftone or a shadow, is crucial. That will give your form solidity. I'm going to start on my shadows. I've already got the hatching in. Now, I know that on this shadow side, the darkest, most contrasty place is here. That the surface itself is getting light, except for the part where the box is blocking the light. So all this light is bouncing off the surface and back into my chair or my box. So I know that I want to start dark here and gradually get lighter. So I'm working with my 5 and my 70, and I'm on marker paper so I can blend. If you're on bond paper, you can't. You just stroke it on, and it can be quite exciting. It's very graphic. So I'm working my way across. Now the marker is darkest and wettest the first stroke you make. I'm just trying to wet the paper, and I'm trying to go a little lighter. Every time you go over the paper, it gets darker and darker. I'm re-wetting the top now so that I can add some of the 70 in, which is really quite dark. And I'm kind of at an oblique angle to this, so I'm doing my best to be able to get this going, but it's now I go back and re-wet it with the 50 if I want it to blend. I've got another area of shadow here. You keep checking, and it's good to have a scrap of paper beside you that's the same paper you're working on, because you can test out your marker and make sure that you're not using the wrong one. Here again, you see it's darkest up at the top, and then it goes light, then it goes dark, and then it goes light. So you're always thinking about that. What's the darkest part? And then you get a gradual value. That's what you're after with shadows, is a gradual value. And even if you have the direction wrong, not that you want to do that, but if you had the direction wrong, it wouldn't matter. As long as it's a gradual value, it will read as the right direction. It will read as shadow. Now I don't even have to worry very much about direction, since I've got that hatching down, and it's already conveying direction. I can just go back and forth over this and fill it in and not worry too much. I don't even have to fill the whole thing in. I can just go that far. Shadows normally are not a hard edge, but we're wanting this to be as graphic as we can make it. So sometimes these renderings have to read across a boardroom, so you want to have the ability to withstand the temptation to make everything soft. You've got to be a little bold here, but this is fine. I can see my strokes. I'm gonna go in here and do a little more, because you're always asking, is the place where it should be darker, or can I go a little more? Can I build a little more contrast in? I'm gonna build a little more contrast in here. As the markers dry, you'll notice it's like watercolor. They lighten up. So that can be a problem if you're not watching. Now I've got another shadow over here. This might have been the best one to start with, only because I'm reaching now across the part of the page that's still wet, and my hand can pull off some of the marker. Just something to think about. And I'm going to go a little darker. This part is kind of in the light, so I don't want it to be too dark. But that hatching is meaning that I can be, you know, a little bit more casual about the application of the marker. And as I said before, there's no controlling this. It's gonna be, this is tricky to go into the light with something so dark. I'm just gonna use a light hand. That's the other beautiful thing about markers, is that they respond to the weight of your hand, the pressure of your hand. So if I press, I'm gonna get dark, and every time I go over it again and again, I get more value, more contrast. So I want to go a little bit darker in here so that I get a little bit of reflected light. And that, of course, goes right back to our cylinder, where it's a little bit lighter here and a little bit darker inside, lighter here, darker inside. So that little accent helps to turn the form. I can put a little accent in there. It might look like a dot later, and I may want to hide that, but there are ways to hide it too. I don't want this leg sticking out too much, so I can make it dark within a light area. This I want to go a little darker than the front. And there is a shadow under here, but it's in the light, so I'm going to be careful not to go too dark. Often I think people have problems with markers because they only make one stroke with it. They don't add more than one stroke. So I've got a 3, what would be a 3 for you, and a 5. I'm going to leave this white. The turn of the corner, I'm going to leave that white, and I'm going to just start going this way. And you see, I don't make just one stroke. I'm doing a bunch. And I'm using 3 and 5, so I can add a little bit of 5 at the beginning, and that will help. And I'm doing the same thing now. This time I'm going to come up from the bottom, because this is round. I'm going to start down here, and I can blend the last marker with the new marker. So I've got 3, the lightest. You blend with the lightest marker and add accents with the darker marker. And you keep checking to make sure you're using the right ones. This is really more in the light than the other, so I'm making sure. I can go a little bit dark down here. This part is could be the 30, because it's a front. It's on the same plane as this, so I want it to look similar, and I can put a little more 50 in the shadows. So gradual values, that's your job, is to make it go from, since that's more lit up here, the light was over here, as you recall. So yeah, I'm lighting that side up, and I'm making this side more shadow. And if I'm going along and I think, well, maybe I can go a little bit darker, I want a little more contrast, I can re-wet that. This is the 10%, which is really, really light, but I want to make a little contrast between the front and the top. So I'm just going to go in and put a little stroke there, and maybe those two, and that's going to be all I'm going to put on the top. I'm not going to put very much. And if I went in and if that were too dark, I could easily just blend it in with the lightest one, and that would be fine. The top, I don't know that I would put anything really there. And I'm going to start right back where my shadow is, because if that gets a little darker, that's not a problem at all. And I can go outside my lines, but over and over again I'm being more and more grateful that I have those outlines in. For your floor plan, it's all the same idea, only now I'm just dealing with these lighter values. I've got a little bit of shadow, but I don't have a lot. So I'm going to put those in with my 5 and maybe accent them a little bit with my 7. If you're going to be using the values, say you're doing all your shadow values, then you could probably leave your 2 markers open, which is what I'm doing now. I'm leaving them open. And don't forget, turn your paper to help you. I've got that etching in, so I don't have to worry too much. It's going to contain, and I've even outlined my shadow. So, and just where the shadow begins, I'll go just a little bit darker and let it fade off as it goes away. There would be a little shadow behind the cushion as well, although that cushion leans like this and it gets a little bit of light, so you've got to be a little careful there. The whole idea is to kind of wet it first with the lightest value, and then you add your accents with your darker value. And I'm gonna just put a little bit of value in there as well. And the top of the cushion is all lit up, but the front of it would have value, so I'm going to put a little value there. And this, I'm just going to keep the value down the center of this if I can help it, and it'll sort of bleed its way out. And that would be about all you'd need to do for that. And then the floor, we're using the 30 for the floor, so I can bring that out. There. And I can darken this up. It's a good idea to darken up around the outside when you're working on a floor plan, because it helps that little key line of white that you put to pull it all together. You can just sort of twist your marker. If it has an obvious pattern of grain, you can put that in, and maybe in the shadow you could go with your darkest marker and put that in. So the darker the value, if you're putting pattern in, the darker you need to go. And I just noticed, so after you're done, you follow all of your ideas that you had when you set out to render this. That you're rendering the light with such and such values, you're rendering the shadows with such and such values, but then afterward you have to go back and make sure that everything has as much emphasis as you wanted it to have.